The morning sun had barely touched the flour-dusted windows when Martha Vance smelled it, the metallic tang of gasoline cutting through the yeast and warmth of her kitchen. She froze mid-kneed, her hands buried in dough, and lifted her head like a wolf catching a wrong scent on the wind. 3 seconds later, the back vents erupted. The flames didn't flicker. They roared with chemical intensity, fed by an accelerant someone had dripped into the exhaust system during the night. Orange heat climbed the walls, licking at timber beams her mother had oiled by hand 40 years ago. The fire moved with purpose, targeting the industrial mixers and the copper pots hanging from their iron hooks. Martha lunged through the thickening smoke, her boots skidding on flour-slick floorboards. The heavy fire extinguisher hung on the far wall, past the mother, the massive cast-iron oven that radiated enough heat to make the air shimmer. Her lungs burned. Acrid smoke clawed at her throat, but she refused to retreat. She yanked the extinguisher from its mount, the weight of it familiar in her grip. Hoisting the metal canister to her shoulder, Martha aimed the nozzle at the heart of the blaze and unleashed a torrent of white retardant. The chemical foam hissed and spat as it fought the gasoline-fed fire, turning the kitchen into a battlefield of steam and smoke. When the roar finally died to a hiss, Martha stood in the center of the wreckage, covered in soot and gray powder. Her bun had come loose. Her knuckles were scraped. But the bakery still stood. The front bell chimed. Martha turned, extinguisher still clutched in her hands, and watched Julian Thorne step over the threshold. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked obscene against the smoke-stained walls. Behind him came 3 men built like loading equipment, silent and stone-faced, followed by a legal assistant clutching a clipboard to her chest like a shield. Julian surveyed the damage with the slow, appreciative gaze of a man admiring his own handiwork. "Rough morning," he said, his voice a condescending drawl. "We heard you might be having some operational difficulties." Martha set the extinguisher down with a hollow clang. "Get out." "Can't do that." Julian pulled a folded document from his breast pocket, shaking it open with theatrical precision. "See, we've acquired certain assets. Inventory debts. The kind your father accumulated before he passed. The kind you inherited along with this charming little fire hazard." He handed the paper to his assistant, who stepped forward and placed it on the counter. Martha didn't need to read it. She'd been expecting this visit for months, ever since the bank had sold her father's debts to Thorne Development Corporation. "The inventory is yours," Martha said, each word costing her. "Take it." "Oh, we will." Julian's smile sharpened. "But there's a specific clause in the contract. Section 12, subsection 4. The debtor must personally deliver the goods to ensure quality control. No substitutions. No hired labor." Martha stared at him. "You want me to load the crates?" "Correct." Julian checked his gold watch, a gesture so casual it made Martha's jaw tighten. "We're on a schedule. Best get started." The crates sat on the cooling racks, each one packed with artisanal sourdough, rye loaves, and bulk grains. 50 pounds apiece. 16 crates total. Martha had loaded them before. Hauling flour sacks and moving equipment was part of the job, but never while covered in soot, never with her hands already trembling from adrenaline, and never under the watchful, mocking eyes of Julian Thorne. She grabbed the first crate by its rope handles and hoisted it to her shoulder. The rough wood bit into her collarbone. Her boots found purchase on the uneven floorboards as she carried the load through the dim interior, past the mother's dying heat, and out into the pale morning light. The truck sat at the curb, a refrigerated Titan humming with mechanical indifference. Martha climbed the metal ramp and set the crate down with a thud. 16 more to go. By the 5th crate, sweat poured down her spine, mixing with the soot and retardant powder. By the 10th, her shoulders screamed. By the 15th, her vision blurred at the edges, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Julian watched from the sidewalk, arms crossed, occasionally making comments about her pace. Slower than expected, he murmured to his assistant. "Make a note." Martha bit the inside of her cheek and kept moving. This was the price of survival. This was what her mother would have done, endured the humiliation, protected the sanctuary. She emerged from the bakery with the final crate, the heaviest one, packed with dense pumpernickel and stone-ground wheat flour. Her legs shook. Her grip on the rope handles felt slippery, uncertain. She focused on the truck, on the last few steps between her and the end of this nightmare. Julian's assistant, a lean man named Silas, shifted his position near the ramp. As Martha passed him, he extended a polished leather boot into her path. The movement was subtle, practiced, designed to look accidental. Martha's foot caught the obstruction. The world tilted. The weight of the crate pulled her forward, and there was no way to recover. She hit the pavement with bone-jarring force, palms and knees scraping against grit and mud. The crate shattered on impact, sending dozens of handcrafted loaves rolling into the gutter, their golden crusts coating in oily street water. Martha stayed on the ground, staring at the ruined bread. Hours of work. The last thing she had to give. Julian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Damaged goods," he said, shaking his head with mock sympathy. "Can't accept those. Means the debt remains unpaid, I'm afraid." Section 18, Quality Standards. You understand. Martha pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. Blood seeped through the torn fabric at her knees. Her palms stung. "But here's the good news," Julian continued, producing another document. "We've recently acquired additional assets in this neighborhood. Specifically, the deed to the private road you're standing on. And the alleyway behind your building. The access points, if you will." He let the words hang in the smoke-heavy air. "You still own the bakery," Julian said, folding the paper with sharp, precise movements. "But we own the land around it. Every entrance. Every exit. Which means, legally speaking, you're landlocked." He signaled to one of his drivers. The men climbed into the cab of the semi-truck parked down the street, a massive 18-wheeler with a corrugated metal trailer. The engine roared to life, belching black exhaust. Under Julian's direction, the driver reversed the behemoth with surgical precision until the back of the trailer pressed against the bakery's front door. The metal bumper groaned against the wooden frame. Sunlight disappeared. The warm amber glow of the bakery's interior lights flickered on automatically, fighting against the sudden, artificial darkness. Martha stood in the shadow of the truck, watching her world shrink to the dimensions of a tomb. "Enjoy your day," Julian said, tipping an imaginary hat. He climbed into a sleek black sedan, and the convoy departed, leaving only the truck and its low, constant hum. Martha retreated into the bakery, her legs finally giving out. She sank onto a flour sack in the corner, pressing her scraped palms against her knees, trying to think through the fog of exhaustion and rage. A small sound made her look up. The ragged boy crouched beneath the flour table, his eyes wide and terrified. He must have slipped in during the chaos of the fire, hiding while the adults waged their war. He wore clothes 3 sizes too large, and his hair stuck up in uneven tufts. Martha softened her expression. She rose, moving to the hidden compartment behind the mother, and retrieved the masterpiece cupcake. It was a single, perfect creation, vanilla cake with buttercream frosting, topped with edible gold leaf. She'd made it for a competition that never happened, saving it for a moment that mattered. She pressed it into the boy's trembling hands. "Go," she whispered. "Out the back. Before they lock it." The boy clutched the cupcake like a treasure and bolted for the rear exit. Martha followed, wanting to see him reach safety. She watched as he pushed through the heavy steel door into the gray light of the alleyway. Then a gloved hand shot out from behind a stack of pallets. The figure moved with professional speed, grabbing the boy's collar and hoisting him off the ground before he could scream. Martha lunged forward, but the attacker was already retreating into the shadows, dragging the boy with him. "No!" Martha's shout died as the door slammed shut in her face. She threw her weight against the handle, but from the outside came the unmistakable clack of a heavy padlock snapping into place. Front door blocked by a semi-truck. Back door bolted from the outside. Martha pressed her forehead against the cold steel, smelling smoke and cinnamon, and realized Julian Thorne had stopped playing games. This was a siege. And she was alone. The digital displays on the industrial ovens flashed angry red, cycling through error codes Martha had never seen in 15 years of operation. She crossed the flour-dusted kitchen, her boots sliding on powder and soot, and pressed her palm against the control panel. The plastic surface burned. No. The word came out hoarse. Someone had bypassed the internal safety limiters. The heating elements refused to disengage, forcing the air to shimmer with a dry, crackling heat. Flour dust hung suspended, each particle a potential spark. The bakery, her sanctuary, was transforming into a combustion chamber. Martha lunged for the front door. Her fingers wrapped around the brass handle, and white-hot pain seared through her palm. She jerked away, cradling her hand against her chest. The locks had been fused. She pounded against the wood with her shoulder, but the heavy door refused to budge. The semi-truck pressed against the frame from the outside. No escape. She spun toward the wall-mounted rotary phone, a vintage piece her mother had insisted on keeping. Martha grabbed the receiver and lifted it to her ear. Silence. Not the normal silence of a dead line, this was hollow, bottomless. She yanked the cord. The copper wiring dangled, severed clean. Her smartphone came out of her apron pocket. No service. Come on. Martha moved through the kitchen, holding the phone high, searching for a single bar. Nothing. Somewhere behind the drywall, a soft mechanical hum vibrated through the plaster. A jammer. The heat pressed against her lungs. Sweat soaked through her shirt, plastering fabric to skin. The mother, the cast iron oven that had been the bakery's heart for 40 years, radiated waves of thermal energy. The copper pots hanging from the timber beams swayed in the rising air currents. Martha wiped her forehead with her sleeve and forced herself to think. Someone wanted her trapped. Someone wanted her burning. The smell hit her next, sulfur, sharp and chemical, cutting through the scent of burnt sugar. She froze. Gas. From below came a rhythmic, metallic sound. Tink. 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 A wrench striking galvanized pipe. Martha's heart kicked against her ribs. The heat was a distraction. The real threat was in the basement. She grabbed the marble rolling pin from the counter, its black-veined surface cool and heavy in her grip. The wooden stairs groaned under her weight as she descended into the shadows. The basement was a labyrinth of cooling compressors and rusted pipes wrapped in fraying insulation. 50-pound flour sacks lined the walls like sandbags. A broad-shouldered silhouette hunched over the main gas manifold. Martha pressed herself against the wall, watching. The man wore a matte black tactical hoodie and a respirator that hissed with each breath. His gloved hands moved with precision, unscrewing the primary coupling. He wasn't creating a simple leak, he was venting the building's entire fuel supply. One spark would level the block. Martha's fingers tightened around the rolling pin. This wasn't intimidation. This was murder dressed up as an accident. The intruder reached for a pipe sealant. Martha moved. The marble connected with his shoulder. Bone and muscle absorbed the impact, but the man grunted, stumbling sideways into a shelf. He turned, and even through the respirator, Martha saw rage in his eyes. He swung a heavy pipe wrench. Steel whistled through the air, splintering wood inches from Martha's skull. She ducked, scrambled backward, and her hand found the edge of a paring knife resting on a workbench. Without thinking, she slashed upward, catching the corner of a 50-pound high-gluten flour sack. The fabric split. She grabbed the top of the bag and heaved. The sack hit the concrete floor and erupted. White powder exploded outward, filling the basement with a choking cloud. The intruder thrashed, clawing at his respirator. His visibility dropped to zero. Martha heard him crash into the metal racks, swearing in a language she didn't recognize. She ran. Her boots pounded up the stairs. She slammed the reinforced oak door and threw the deadbolt. Her muscles screamed as she shoved the heavy industrial mixer against the frame. Below, the intruder began ramming the door. Each thud vibrated through the floor, through her bones. Martha staggered toward the front of the shop. Her lungs burned. Flour dust coated her throat. She dropped to her knees and pressed her face against the brass mail slot, desperate for air, for a glimpse of help. Rain slicked the cobblestones. Mud pooled in the gutters. And there, discarded in the gray slush, was the gold silk ribbon from the boy's cupcake box. Martha's breath stopped. The ribbon lay trampled, half buried in city soot. The boy was gone. Moved. Hidden. She pushed herself upright, fighting the dizziness. The heat was unbearable now. The timber beams creaked as the wood expanded. She needed another exit. Her mother's voice echoed through memory, "There's a cold spot near the pantry. Don't ask me why." Martha stumbled toward the pantry, shoving aside the heavy-wheeled cooling rack. She dropped to her knees and ripped up the scorched linoleum. Beneath the flooring, flush with the floorboards, was a circular iron ring. Her mother's secret. Martha hooked her fingers through the ring and pulled. The wooden hatch was heavier than it looked, reinforced with metal bands. She heaved, muscles trembling. The door lifted. Cold air rushed upward from the crawlspace, meeting the superheated atmosphere of the kitchen. Pressure shifted. Wind howled through the opening with violent force, ripping the hatch from Martha's grip. The door slammed shut. A spring-loaded bolt clicked into place. Darkness swallowed her whole. Martha blinked, waiting for her eyes to adjust. Nothing. The black was absolute. She fumbled for the small pen-like clip to her apron and clicked it on. The narrow beam swept across packed earth and stone foundation. The crawlspace was barely 4 feet high. Martha crouched, breathing in dust and cold iron. The walls pressed close, ribs of the building's skeleton. Her light caught the edge of a moldering wooden shelf. On it sat a rusted metal tin. Martha pried open the lid. Inside, protected from the damp, was a stack of paper. She lifted the top sheet. A check. Made out to Sarah Vance for $5,000. The date was 15 years old. She flipped through the stack. Every month. Same amount. Same sharp, aggressive initials in the signature line, B.S. 15 years of payments. Uncashed. Martha's hands shook. Her mother had never mentioned this. Never deposited a single check. A heavy creak sounded above her head. Martha killed the light and held her breath. Through the narrow crack between floorboards, she saw movement. Boots. Scuffed leather work boots, the kind construction workers wore. Ben's boots. Martha pressed her eye against the gap. The scruffy regular stood in the center of her kitchen, perfectly still. He wasn't calling her name. Wasn't searching for survivors. He stood with military posture, his shadow stretching long across the flour-dusted floor. An electronic chirp split the silence. Package 1 is secured and in transit. Ben's voice was clipped, professional. The warmth was gone, stripped away like a costume. Package 2 is contained in the subfloor. The thermal event is proceeding as scheduled. Requesting extraction at the rally point in 5 mics. Martha's blood turned to ice. Ben wasn't a friend. He was the spotter. The man who ensured she was exactly where Julian wanted her. Above, Ben's boots turned and walked toward the front door. The floorboards groaned under his weight. Then silence. Martha sat in the darkness, clutching uncashed checks written to a dead woman, while her bakery burned overhead and the boy remained missing. The world, she thought, was crueler than she'd ever imagined. The darkness pressed against Martha's eyelids like wet canvas. She couldn't remember how long she'd been crouched in the crawlspace, listening to the creak of floorboards overhead, the distant roar of heat-consuming timber. Her palm throbbed where the brass handle had scorched skin. The penlight had died minutes ago, or hours. Time moved differently in the earth. A scrape of wood against wood. The hatch lifted. Cold air rushed down, carrying the scent of burnt sugar and ash. A silhouette blocked the opening, broad-shouldered against the amber glow of her dying bakery. Martha. Ben's voice, rough and urgent. Give me your hand. She stared upward. Her muscles refused to cooperate. The man who'd called in her location like coordinates on a battlefield wanted her to trust him now. She pressed herself against the stone foundation. The ovens are about to blow the gas line. Ben's arm extended into the darkness. You have maybe 3 minutes. The mother groaned overhead, metal expanding beyond its engineered limits. Martha grabbed his wrist. He hauled her upward with surprising strength, her boots scraping against the lip of the opening. She collapsed onto the scorched linoleum, lungs heaving. The kitchen was unrecognizable. Flour dust hung in the superheated air like snow in a furnace. The copper pots had fallen from their hooks, dented and blackened. "How did you?" Martha's voice cracked. "Side window." Ben gestured toward the narrow casement near the pantry. The glass was shattered, fragments glittering on the floor. "Saw Julian's crew setting up equipment. Figured you'd need someone." Martha's hand found the wall, steadying herself. The window was barely 18 inches wide. Ben's shoulders wouldn't fit through that gap. She opened her mouth to question the geometry, but he was already moving, dragging a heavy oak prep table toward the front entrance. "Help me barricade this." He didn't wait for agreement, his movements precise and efficient. "They'll breach the front first." Something in his certainty steadied her. She grabbed the opposite end of the table, her burned palm screaming protest. Together they wedged the oak against the door frame. The physical effort pushed the questions aside. She wasn't alone anymore. The thought bloomed warm in her chest, a fragile defiance against the suffocating terror. They worked in synchronized silence, hauling grain sacks and flour bins, constructing a fortress from the materials of her trade. Ben moved through her kitchen with unsettling familiarity, anticipating which pieces were heavy enough to matter, which corners needed reinforcement. Martha told herself he was simply observant, simply kind. She wanted to believe it. The first sledgehammer strike shattered the illusion of safety. The front window exploded inward, diamond shards spraying across the display counter. Martha flinched, arms raised to shield her face. Through the jagged opening came voices, rough, eager voices that belonged to men who'd been promised payment for destruction. "Get the frames," someone shouted. "Whole facade comes down tonight." Martha's vision narrowed to the sledgehammer arcing through the darkness, steel head gleaming in the amber light. It connected with the timber frame, splintering wood that had stood for 40 years. Another strike. Another. The methodical rhythm of demolition. The mixers. Martha sprinted toward the industrial equipment. Her fingers found the power switch, muscle memory guiding her through the smoke. Ben, the flour. He understood immediately. Together they hauled 3 50-pound bags to the stainless steel bowls, tearing the fabric and dumping the contents. Martha slammed the aeration setting to maximum. The mixers roared to life, blades spinning at brutal speed. Fine pastry flour erupted outward in a dense, choking cloud. The whiteout consumed the storefront. The intruder's aggressive shouts transformed into coughing, retching gasps. Martha glimpsed figures stumbling backward through the broken window, hands clawing at faces, visibility reduced to zero. The domestic weapon bought them seconds, maybe minutes. Her satisfaction died as splintering wood echoed from the rear of the building. The delivery door. Martha ran through the kitchen, Ben close behind. The steel door shuddered under repeated impacts, the deadbolt holding but the frame beginning to warp. She could hear the rhythmic slam of something heavy, a battering ram, industrial grade. The sinks. She pointed. Industrial sprayers. Ben grabbed the high-pressure nozzle while Martha twisted the temperature valves to their maximum setting. Steam hissed from the metal, scalding her already injured palm. She bit down on the pane, watching the door. Waiting. The frame groaned. A gap appeared, metal peeling away from brick. Martha squeezed the trigger. Boiling water erupted through the opening in a pressurized stream. The screams were immediate, animal sounds of agony. The battering stopped. Someone was sobbing in the alley, the kind of raw, broken sound that came from third-degree burns. Martha's hands shook. She'd done this. She'd hurt people defending her mother's sanctuary. The sprayer clattered to the floor. Red and blue lights strobed through the flour-hazed air. Relief crashed over her like a breaking wave. The sheriff. Finally, someone who would see this for what it was, attempted murder dressed in construction permits. Martha ran toward the barricaded front entrance, shoving tables aside, desperate to reach help. Sheriff Miller. Her voice broke. They're destroying the building. They tried to burn. The words died in her throat. Sheriff Miller stood beside his cruiser, nodding to Julian Thorne. The architect leaned against his luxury sedan, arms crossed, watching the chaos with the detached interest of someone observing an ant farm. No handcuffs for the sledgehammer-wielding thugs. No weapons drawn. Just a quiet conversation between men who understood their positions in the hierarchy. The sheriff's boots crunched over broken glass as he entered. His eyes scanned the destruction, the shattered windows, the scorched walls, the white film coating every surface, and settled on Martha with cold appraisal. Martha Vance. His voice carried the false warmth of a folksy lawman. You're under arrest for assault against licensed contractors. The world tilted sideways. Licensed, Martha couldn't form the complete thought. They broke into my home. They tried to gas the building. I have signed work orders. The sheriff produced a document from his jacket, official seals stamped across municipal letterhead. City Council approved emergency demolition due to structural concerns. These men were performing their legal duties when you attacked them with industrial equipment. Structural concerns. Martha's laugh came out strangled. This building has stood for. Rules are rules, Miss Vance. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his holster, a casual threat. You use those mixers or sprayers again, I'll have to protect these workers from your violent outbursts. Lethal force if necessary. The floor beneath Martha's feet ceased to exist. She was falling, tumbling through a world where words had lost their meaning. Violence was defense. Destruction was legal. And the law protected those who could afford to rewrite it. Her mother's checks. The envelope hidden beneath the register floorboard. Proof that the bakery was solvent, that the taxes were paid, that 40 years of careful planning had secured their future. Martha stumbled toward the counter, fingers scrabbling at the loose board. The wood lifted. The envelope emerged, creased and yellowed but intact. These. She thrust the papers toward the sheriff, hands trembling. My mother saved. Every payment. The debt is settled. Sheriff Miller reached forward, but Julian was faster. The architect stepped through the ruined doorway with theatrical leisure, reaching into his breast pocket. He withdrew a series of checks, identical twins to the ones Martha held, except for a single word stamped across their faces in red ink, cancelled. Your mother wasn't a saver, Martha. Julian's voice was silk over razors. She was a beggar. Martha's vision tunneled. High-interest personal loans from every small-time lender in 3 counties. Julian examined the checks with mock sympathy. Desperate measures to keep the ovens running. I bought the notes. Every single one. 3 years ago. The truth landed like a physical blow. Martha's knees buckled. Ben's hand caught her elbow, steadying her, but she barely registered the touch. Her mother's secret hadn't been foresight. It had been shame, buried beneath floorboards, hidden from a daughter who thought she understood sacrifice. You don't owe the city anymore. Julian leaned closer, close enough that Martha could smell expensive cologne mixed with ash. You owe me. Every brick. Every mixing bowl. Every thread in that flour-dusted apron. Mine. Martha's fingers crumpled the worthless checks. 40 years reduced to meaningless paper. Movement at the edge of the crowd. A small figure, trembling. The ragged boy emerged from behind a woman's skirts, his oversized clothes hanging from thin shoulders. His mother, a hollow-eyed woman Martha vaguely recognized from the village, gripped his arm. The boy's face was wet with tears. Tell them. The mother's voice shook. Tell them what happened. The boy pointed at Martha with a finger that couldn't stay steady. She stole my cupcake. His words came out choked. I asked for bread. She beat me and stole it. The lie hung in the air, obvious and grotesque. Martha saw the truth in the boy's eyes, the crushing weight of coercion, the terror of disappointing the adults who controlled his survival. Julian had bought this testimony. A year's wages, probably. Maybe more. Enough to turn kindness into theft, compassion into cruelty. the crowd murmured. Voices that had once greeted Martha with warmth now carried edges of suspicion. She could hear the narrative crystallizing, the cruel baker who preyed on vulnerable children, who hoarded wealth while pretending charity. Sheriff Miller's handcuffs clicked open. "Martha Vance, you're under arrest." The metal closed around her wrists, cold and final. "Assault, theft, resisting lawful eviction." The steel bit into her burned palm. Martha didn't resist. Resistance required believing the system could still recognize truth. That faith had died somewhere between the checks and the child's coerced testimony. Julian raised his hand. A signal. When your home, business, and freedom are taken away from you, the law says, this is how it should be. This woman believed it. And then one building in the city ceased to exist. The demolition crew resumed their work. Sledgehammers swung. Timber splintered. The mother's cast iron shell groaned as the first wall collapsed, pulling the oven sideways. 40 years of warmth buried in rubble. Sheriff Miller guided Martha toward the cruiser, his grip professional and impersonal. The crowd parted. Through the gap, Martha glimpsed Ben standing motionless in the doorway, his silhouette framed by destruction. He didn't call out. Didn't protest. He simply watched her loaded into the vehicle with the same military posture he'd used when reporting Package 2. The cruiser door slammed shut. Through the window, Martha watched her sanctuary collapse. The sound accompanied her exit, the death rattle of a world where kindness mattered, where small spaces could resist corporate gravity. Julian stood in the street, arms crossed, savoring his victory. Martha closed her eyes. The world, she thought, devours those who refuse to devour first. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 5 times, each brass note a death knell. Martha's wrists ached where the handcuffs bit into swollen flesh, the metal warm from her body heat. She sat on the flour-dusted floor of her mother's bakery, surrounded by the wreckage of 40 years. Copper pots lay scattered like fallen soldiers. The mother's cast-iron bulk tilted at an obscene angle, half buried in rubble. Julian Thorne stood atop the mahogany counter, polished shoes planted on scarred wood where her mother had rolled 10,000 batches of dough. His charcoal suit remained immaculate despite the chaos, not a speck of ash marring the perfect lines. He checked his gold watch with theatrical precision, letting the gesture linger. 5 o'clock. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who'd already won. Right on schedule. Outside, the yellow bulldozer idled. Diesel fumes crept through the broken windows, mixing with the burnt sugar scent of destruction. The crowd had gathered, neighbors who'd eaten her bread, children who'd pressed their noses against her display case, people who understood the difference between survival and theft. They stood silent, watching. Sheriff Miller's hand rested on his holster. The gesture was casual, familiar, the posture of a man who'd learned to ignore his conscience somewhere between his first bribe and his comfortable retirement fund. Julian raised his hand, fingers splayed against the amber light filtering through smoke-hazed air. The signal would come soon. One drop of his palm, and the driver would slam the blade into brick. The hearth would become memory, replaced by a parking lot for luxury vehicles. Martha's mind retreated. Not to escape, but to remember. The brief minutes she'd spent in Julian's penthouse office 3 weeks ago, when he'd summoned her to discuss options. The mahogany desk sprawling across one wall, wide as a dining table. The blueprint spread across its surface, technical schematics rendered in crisp blue lines on white paper. She'd pretended to study the floor while he talked, but her eyes had traced every detail of those plans. Glass and steel specifications for Vane Tower, the skyscraper pressed against her building's northern wall like a predator against prey. The basement levels had caught her attention. Cross-hatched shading indicated shared structures, foundations intertwined beneath the earth. Her father had been a structural engineer before the cancer took him. She'd grown up reading load calculations like bedtime stories, understanding how weight traveled through bone and steel. The two buildings weren't neighbors. They were fused. Martha pushed herself upright. The handcuffs forced her shoulders forward, but she locked her knees, refusing to bow. Julian. Her voice cut through the diesel rumble. Stop. His hand paused mid-descent. Surprise flickered across his blade-sharp features, quickly replaced by amusement. The baker speaks. He examined his manicured nails. I'm devastated to inform you, Martha, but your legal options expired when the sheriff put you in restraints. This is progress. You're on the wrong side of history. Not history. Martha's burned palm throbbed. She ignored the pain. Physics. Julian's smile didn't waver, but his fingers curled slightly. The foundation. Martha gestured toward the floor with her chin, unable to use her hands. Your blueprints showed the connection. Limestone blocks beneath my building, locked into your steel pilings. The structures share root systems. Fascinating. Julian's drawl lengthened. The simple baker learned some big words. Should I applaud? Structural resonance. Martha pushed the words out fast, desperate. When the blade hits my load-bearing wall, the impact creates a specific frequency. The energy won't dissipate. It can't. The vibration will travel through the shared foundation directly into your tower's rigid frame. The crowd murmured. Someone in the rear whispered a question. Your glass facade. Martha locked eyes with Julian. 50 stories of seamless panels, each one calibrated to flex independently. Beautiful engineering. Except you built it on top of a limestone foundation designed for a 3-story bakery. The frequencies don't match. Julian's jaw tightened. Almost imperceptible, but Martha caught it. The resonance will amplify as it climbs. Her voice steadied, muscle memory from a childhood spent listening to her father explain catastrophic failures. By the time it reaches your lobby, the harmonic vibration will shatter every pane of glass in the entrance. Including, she paused, letting the words gather weight. The supports holding your 3-ton crystal chandelier. Silence expanded like gas filling a vacuum. Julian erupted into laughter. The sound came from deep in his chest, genuine and cruel. He clutched his sides, shoulders shaking, performing disbelief for his audience. Pseudoscience. He wiped imaginary tears from his eyes. The desperate baker tries to play structural engineer. How precious. I'm not playing. Martha's voice dropped to something harder. My father designed municipal bridges for 20 years. I grew up reading failure reports. I understand load transfer. Your father. Julian's smile sharpened. The men who built things nobody remembers. How fitting his daughter would cling to theories nobody believes. He straightened on the counter, adjusting his tie with one hand. My tower was designed by the finest architectural minds in 3 states. Computer-modeled, stress-tested, certified by 14 separate inspections. You think your little pile of bricks poses a threat to modern engineering? His laugh softened into something worse, pity. You're a baker, Martha. You need dough. You measure flour. You don't understand the mathematics of what I've built. Martha opened her mouth, but Julian's hand dropped. The signal. Swift. Violent. Final. The bulldozer's engine roared. Gears engaged with a metal scream. The blade lurched forward, steel teeth hungry for brick. Movement erupted from Martha's peripheral vision. Ben shed his canvas coat with the fluid grace of someone removing armor after battle. The oil-stained fabric hit the floor, revealing a charcoal suit cut with such precision it looked architectural. Italian wool, Martha recognized dimly. Custom-tailored, with subtle pinstripes catching the light. His posture transformed. The slump vanished. Shoulders squared, spine straight, head level, military precision aged into executive authority. The bumbling drifter dissolved, replaced by something Martha couldn't quite process. Power radiated from him like heat from the mother's core. The crowd gasped. Someone swore. Benjamin, stepped between Sheriff Miller and Martha. His voice, when it emerged, carried no trace of the raspy mumble she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, it resonated with the quiet certainty of inherited wealth and absolute control. Benjamin Sterling. He produced a leather folder from inside his jacket. I believe you've heard of me, Sheriff. Miller's face drained of color. His hand dropped from his holster as if the weapon had suddenly become radioactive. Julian's smile froze. The Sterling King. Sheriff Miller's voice cracked. Sir, I didn't. We weren't informed. Of course you weren't. Benjamin opened the folder with movements too controlled to be casual. That was the point. He withdrew documents. Court seals gleamed in the amber light. Martha glimpsed headers, forensic audit. Cease and desist. Federal warrant. The B.S. initialed on the bakery's ledgers. Benjamin addressed the crowd now, projecting without raising his volume. Julian here convinced Martha those stood for bad standing. Creative interpretation. He produced a second sheet, holding it high. Benjamin Sterling. My seal. I've been watching over this bakery since Martha's mother asked for help 30 years ago. Quiet investments. Silent partnership. Protection. Julian descended from the counter in 3 rapid movements. That's impossible. I bought the debt. Legal acquisition. The contracts were forgeries. Benjamin's interruption was surgical. Sophisticated ones, I'll grant you. Your firm intercepted my payments, rerouted them through shell companies, created an illusion of default. He turned the document toward Julian. Martha glimpsed columns of numbers, transaction codes highlighted in yellow. Wire fraud across state lines. Forgery of financial instruments. Attempted theft of property through fraudulent means. Benjamin's voice never rose above conversational volume. The Attorney General has been very patient, Julian. We needed you to commit the final act. What final act? Julian's face had gone pale beneath his cultivated tan. Destroying evidence. Benjamin gestured toward the bulldozer. The moment your blade touches brick, you transition from civil fraud to felony obstruction. The warrants activate. The bulldozer blade struck the wall. The impact arrived as sound first, a deep, bass note that Martha felt in her sternum. The brick exploded inward, dust billowing. Then came the vibration. Not violent shaking, but something worse. A low-frequency hum that bypassed conscious hearing and settled into bone marrow. The floor trembled. The sensation traveled through Martha's boots, up her shins, into her spine. She'd felt this before, years ago, standing too close to industrial equipment. Resonance. The specific frequency where materials stop absorbing energy and start amplifying it. A sharp crack split the air. Then another. A rapid-fire percussion of breaking glass. Through the broken window, Martha watched Vane Tower's lobby. The crystal chandelier swung in wide, violent arcs. The suspension cable screamed against its mount. For 3 heartbeats, the massive fixture held. Then physics asserted dominance. The chandelier plummeted. 3 tons of crystal and steel accelerated at 9.8 meters per second squared, exactly as Martha's father had taught her to calculate. It hit the marble floor with the sound of a car crash. Shrapnel exploded outward. Glass panes shattered in a cascading wave, each break triggering the next through harmonic sympathy. Julian's billion-dollar lobby became a hurricane of fragments. Sheriff Miller moved with surprising speed for a man his size. He crossed the floor in 4 strides, yanked Julian's arms behind his back, and snapped handcuffs around thin wrists. The metal clicked shut with finality. Julian Thorne. Miller's voice had lost its folksy warmth. You're under arrest for fraud, grand larceny, and felony endangerment. You can't, Julian struggled. I own half this county. My lawyers will. Won't do much against federal charges. Benjamin folded his documents with precise creases. I've spent the last month building an airtight case. The SEC has frozen your accounts. Your board received notice of termination an hour ago. He stepped closer to Julian, voice dropping to something only Martha could hear. You should have done your research, Thorne. I don't forgive people who hurt what I protect. The sheriff dragged Julian toward the door. The architect's polished shoes scraped across broken glass, leaving dark smears. His screaming, about vision, about progress, about destiny, faded as the cruiser door slammed shut. Benjamin produced a key from his pocket. Small. Silver. He unlocked Martha's handcuffs with gentle efficiency. Sorry about the delay. His smile carried warmth she'd never seen in his scruffy persona. Had to wait for him to seal his own fate. Martha rubbed her wrists, speechless. The crowd erupted into cheers. 1 year later, the hearth gleamed. Victorian trim had been restored to glory. Copper pots hung from refinished beams. The mother stood repaired and radiant, her cast iron bulk producing heat that filled the space with purpose. State-of-the-art mixers hummed beside traditional wooden tools. The marriage of heritage and progress. Martha stood behind her counter, arranging fresh masterpiece cupcakes on vintage china plates. Each one perfect. Each one proof. A figure in an orange vest moved past the window. Julian Thorne, stripped of suits and swagger, pushed a broom through the gutter. Court-ordered community service. His hands, once manicured for boardroom conquests, now blistered from honest labor. He paused, looking at the bakery's warm glow. Martha watched him through clean glass. No anger remained. Only pity for a man who'd measured worth in numbers and missed everything that mattered. Benjamin sat at his usual table, reading the morning paper. He still preferred the corner booth, still dressed like someone who valued substance over flash. The suit stayed home most days. They told me I was too kind for this world. Martha set a fresh cupcake beside his coffee. Turns out, the world was waiting for someone to be kind to. Benjamin smiled. Outside, the city moved forward. Inside, warmth spread from the mother's core, feeding everyone who entered. Some fortresses were built from flour and stubborn love. Those were the ones worth defending.